Earlier this week, I sat down to read our gospel story for this Sunday, and the first thing that came to my mind was, well, that all went downhill really quickly, actually. Because it was just last Sunday that we heard part one of this story, and I know many of you weren't here, but trust me, things were going much differently last week. It was just last Sunday that I talked about how Jesus, after being baptized by John and spending 40 days in the wilderness, he had officially begun his public ministry as he started to travel back home to the town of Nazareth, where he grew up. And filled with the same Holy Spirit that had descended on him in the Jordan River and driven him out into the wilderness, he had been preaching and teaching in the synagogues and doing miracles along the way as he was going. And he had made quite an impression out there, obviously, so much so that when he does finally make it all the way home to Nazareth, well, then things were going great for him there, too. It was the Sabbath, and he was center stage among an adoring congregation, every priest's dream, actually. And he's reading this beautiful passage from the prophet Isaiah about good news for the poor and freedom for the prisoner, sight for the blind, and relief for the oppressed, which is exactly where the story picks up this week. Now, every eye in the synagogue was fixed on Jesus, Luke says. They're impressed by his gracious words and his authoritative bearing. I mean, wasn't this Joseph's boy? The carpenter's kid, the one with the iffy birth story, right? I mean, who would have thought that he would have grown up to become such a healer, a miracle worker, a preacher, their very own rising star? And really, it's not difficult for us to imagine our way into the town people's thinking and their point of view. I mean, who knows how long that they had been waiting to welcome Jesus home, to see firsthand for themselves all of the wondrous things that they had been hearing about just through the grapevine, about how heavens had been opened up in Jesus' presence that day in the Jordan, about how diseases just disappeared, demons fled at a mere word from him, that water turned into wine, a miracle that they were particularly interested in him repeating now that he was all the way home, right? They were excited. Because who knows? I mean, maybe the people of Nazareth had a bit of an inferiority complex. I mean, we know it wasn't some big and prosperous town. Much more likely, it was very small. Very simple village, maybe 1,000 people or less, out of the way. Not much important stuff was going on. Not many important people were calling it home. I'm reminded of the story in the book of John where Philip comes to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And he's so excited about this that he goes to find his friend Nathanael, and he says, Nathanael, we have come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one that Isaiah is talking about, and he wants him to come and see Jesus of Nazareth. Do you remember Nathanael's response? He says, well, can anything good come out of Nazareth? The skepticism, obvious in his voice. Well, maybe the people of Nazareth are tired of people thinking about them like that, right? And this Jesus kid, all grown up, is their chance to finally be known for something. I mean, they want to go out and put one of those signs on the edge of town that says, "Welcome to Nazareth," right? Home of the 18 AD goat-herding regional champions, the Nazareth Nighthawks, and home of Jesus, the Messiah. Now, surely they must have thought that more than just fame, if their boy was willing to do all that good stuff for those strangers, those cast-offs, all those people that are, out there somewhere, well, then just imagine what he would be willing to do once he got back home among his real people, the insiders, right? The favorites, the ones who know and love him best. And by all accounts, if you take all these pieces, it adds up to a very beautiful scene set up perfectly for a movie like Happy Ending, where the hero returns home and he blesses his people and he makes everything right in the world. Yes, the end, it's great. But then we hear in our gospel story today, well, that isn't what happens at all, is it? Because all of a sudden, within the space of only about 10 verses, everything goes downhill very, very quickly. We can't help but wonder, how in the world did this tender little homecoming all of a sudden turn so ugly? I mean, how does curiosity turn into contempt? How does delight give way to hatred? How does worship morph so quickly into violence? I've been thinking a lot about that this week. And the conclusion that I keep coming to is, well, that all of this is Jesus' fault, actually. Yes, you heard me right. I'm putting this one on Jesus this week. Because for some reason, right in the middle of all of this pride and praise and good stuff, when everything does seem to be going so well, Jesus just sort of goes off. No doubt you'll quote me one of those old proverbs. He says, "Doctor, heal yourself." And you're probably going to want me to do what you do for you here, what you've heard I've been doing out in Capernaum for all those Gentile types. Well, guess what? I just want you to know up front, right now, I'm not doing it. And oh, by the way, when the prophets of old came to do miracles and wonders, more often than not, it was for Israel's enemies, not Israel herself. So just get used to it. It's like, boom, How do you like those apples, basically? Now, it's at this point in the story that I can't help but think, oh, my goodness, what has gotten into Jesus? I mean, I know he just said that no prophet is accepted in his hometown, except for the fact that he was just being accepted in his hometown prior to that. So what gives? Well, maybe Jesus is offended because he thinks they're surprised that he's done so well, and he hears challenge in their words. Well, after all, right, he's just Joseph's son. Is he skeptical of their praise? Suspicious of their motives? Is he maybe just in a really bad mood? Is he tired? Hangry? I don't know, right? It's hard for us to know for sure, but one idea that might be the case is that as well as these hometown folks think they know Jesus, he knows them so much better. And let's not forget that he just finished reading Isaiah's year of favor, of Jubilee, when the blind will find sight. Again, the captives are released, the oppressed find relief, the poor are consoled. And just so we don't miss the point of where Jesus is going with all this, the direction that he's headed, it's also important to think about, what he didn't read. Because you see, Isaiah goes on from there, telling of the day that the Lord will trample down all of Israel's enemies. He's going to crush them underfoot, restore Israel to its right place. But Jesus, he doesn't read that part. Because for Jesus, his life and ministry, they're about a different way. He's bringing a new kingdom, a different kingdom than the world, and it has a very different set of rules than the earthly kingdom, and that's why already these two are starting to clash with each other. And for what Jesus is talking about, for all of that to come true, for that kingdom to come about, well, then there's going to need to be some changes, actually. For as Mary sang to her boy before he was even born, in order to raise the lowly, God's going to have to bring the powerful down a few notches. In order for the poor and the hungry to have more, well, the rich are going to have a little less. In order for God's love and grace to reach everyone, it's going to have to move beyond the chosen ones, the insiders, the hometown crowd. Now, that's what Jesus was talking about. And it's obvious if you hear in that story that on the first go-around, the hometown crowd, well, they don't get it, right? They totally miss what he's trying to tell them. And so Jesus gets frustrated. He's human, after all. He gets frustrated and he decides that he's going to really drive the point home, and he does it by citing God's long history of prioritizing the outsiders, the foreigners, the strangers, the needies, all those who look different, act different. I mean, he reminds them, Elijah, he was sent to care for just the one widow of Zarephath, not all the widows in Israel. And Elisha, he was instructed to heal Naaman the Syrian, not all of the lepers in Israel, which would have been heard as blasphemy to those people. In other words, God has always been in the business of working on the margins, crossing lines, of reaching out to all of those who need it, regardless of who they are or what they are. God isn't just about the hometown crowd. He's about all of those people who need him. And there's no special treatment for them because all people are special to God. And that message, it didn't go over so well. They were hurt by it. They were angry, so angry that they decided to invite Jesus to go cliff diving without the benefit of the water underneath to break his fall. So you see, it is Jesus' fault, right? We're going to blame this on him today because he goes and he says something he does something that you're never supposed to do, not even to strangers, much less friends and neighbors and people you care about. He has the audacity to tell them the truth. He tells them the truth about their pettiness and their prejudice, about their fear and their shame, about their willingness and even eagerness to get ahead at any cost, even at the expense of others. Basically, what he's telling them about is their selfishness. Now, it certainly seems a bit crazy and violent that they would want to hurl Jesus off of a cliff because of that. But that would definitely be one way of ensuring that they no longer have to hear what they don't want to hear. And after all, the truth can hurt, can it? I mean, we know that. I mean, think about it. Is it not the case that if someone says something negative about us that we know isn't true, it may bother us, it may irritate us, but it doesn't really make us mad. But when somebody says something negative about us that has a kernel of truth to it, that deep down we know is really a lot more accurate than we want it to be, well, that's when we get really angry. Angry enough to look around for the nearest cliff. Now, you may not know this, but they have a lot of little instructional sayings that they give to preachers to try and help them to understand exactly what we're supposed to be doing when we get up here in this pulpit, all right? Now, a few of them that are helpful, it says, talk with your people, not at them, all right? That's a good one, always useful. Learn to see who is falling asleep from a distance without looking directly at them, all right? Also very helpful. I see you back there. But the one that came to mind for me this week was that the role of the preacher is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable, all right? Now, you may be shocked to learn this, but in my experience, that most of the people that I have preached to in my 15 years or so of doing this are much more into the comfort the afflicted piece and not so much into the afflict the comfortable piece, all right? Because it's not fun to be told things that make you uncomfortable. And the truth is that most priests shy away from doing it because they don't want to upset people, things like that. But Jesus, one of the best things about Jesus is Jesus isn't afraid to afflict the comforted, whether that be his family and friends in Nazareth or you and I sitting in here in this beautiful church today. But he does it not just because he thinks it's fun to create chaos and he wants to see things go downhill so quickly. He does it because he knows that that is exactly what we need to hear in our lives. I mean, the reason Jesus' message was so hard for the people of Nazareth was because they had allowed their selfishness to blind them to all the things that he was trying to say and do, the new things he was trying to say and do in their lives and around them. And the truth is that way too often in our lives, we do the same thing. I mean, selfishness is by far one of the most difficult things in life to overcome. And it is the root cause of so many of the problems that we have in our lives. And the way that Jesus goes about addressing our selfishness today, the way he goes about pushing at it a bit, is to try to get us to look outside of our own lives, our own desires, our own needs, our own wants, even our own agendas and our own ideas and our own beliefs, to get outside of that. Not because they aren't important, not because they don't matter, they do, But way too often, we allow all of those things to block us from seeing what is on the other side of them. The people on the other side of them. People who are in need of grace and forgiveness and love. In other words, so many people absolutely just like you and me. Now, it's totally understandable that we want to believe that these gifts of God for us, all that stuff about good news and release and recovery of sight and freedom of debt, well, as I said last week, if you were here, all of that, it is for us because we are blind. We are captive to so many things in our lives, and we need that. But the thing is, it doesn't stop there. It never stops with me. It never stops with us, with the insiders who think that we know Jesus that so well that we deserve it. For if that was the case, then I would expect Jesus would tell us today, here in this place, the same thing he told his community that day in Nazareth, that we're missing the point. That just like Jesus' hometown folk, in our selfishness, we have taken all of these wonderfully gracious promises of God to be just words on a page, understood only on a very surface level, just become empty platitudes, which meant to make us feel better about ourselves when the truth is that they are meant to change us in our lives in very real and very concrete ways. And so maybe I need to do my job this week for a change and afflict the comfortable a bit. Nothing harsh or too big. Everybody's like, oh gosh, no, it's nothing like that. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask you to really think about what all of this would look like in your life in just this week ahead, right? I mean, people spend so much time and energy these days just sort of angrily yelling into the void, right? Getting so wrapped up in how they see the world and how they see the people in the world that it becomes all they see. But the better way, the way we are asked today, is for us to look past all of that, to look up a bit from our own lives to those people who are around us, whether they're family, friends, co-workers, or complete strangers. Approach the people you meet this week with that truth in your heart and in your minds. That God's message of good news isn't just for you, but for them as well. And then, because of that, be open to the possibility that in the moments that you interact with them, in the things that you do, in the words that you say, consider that you yourself are possibly God's good news to them. Remember, Jesus isn't ours. We are his. And his message of mercy and grace, forgiveness and love and acceptance and welcome, it isn't just for us, it's for everyone. And thank God it is. Amen.